Hello, G-Bros, and today we're going to be talking about the fiction is the mathematics of the humanities, on showing A does not equal A equals A does not equal A without B. And the key is on showing. Now that phrase right there is based on a paper called A is A, and this is in a book called Reconstructing A is A. That paper, I guess 2012, is rethinking the law of identity in Aristotle. Today, I would associate that with the work of Hegel, who is also very much in the business of rethinking A is A, which we find in Aristotle, most notably in the science of logic. But anyway, the argument of this paper is, if it is the case that indeed human ontology is more paradoxical and ironic than it is, say, consistent and non-contradictory, which is the impression we can get from the principle of A is A, then I would say that literature, and what constitutes quote-unquote great literature, is evidence that indeed human ontology is more contradictory in a Hegelian sense than Aristotelian. Because what makes great literature work is, in fact, when it shows and operates in a manner that suggests misinterpretation, irony, which Harold Bloom stresses, contradiction, and paradox. These are the subjects of great literature. And the very fact that they are the subjects of great literature would be to say that literature functions as a kind of case study or quote-unquote proof that indeed the nature of reality is more AB than AA. And I'm just going to say AB for short, then A is A. I'm not going to repeat the entire formula every single time. And again, AB can be associated with Hegel. Now, a proof, we have to understand, is not necessarily something that forces assent. I think this is a misunderstanding of what a proof is. A proof is something of which provides reason to think of something, but that reason to think must be lived out and tested. So if I give you Austin Farrer would talk about a proof as if I give you a land title, you still have to walk the land to see that the title is accurate. You can't just look at the title and say, oh, therefore, this is the land. The map isn't the territory. If you want to find out the map is accurate, you have to walk the territory. But the map would give you reason to think what the territory is like, and would also give you an indication of how you should carry yourself across the territory. But you may walk the territory and find a mistake in the map. Maybe it missed a river, missed a fallen tree, or so on and so forth. But it also could be the case that the map is not 100% correct, but still 99% correct, right? So maps are not territories, and proofs are maps of which don't verify the nature of what the territory is like, but gives us reason to think what the territory is like, and in turn gives us reason to think what the map should be like. An accurate map should reflect the territory, and the territory should reflect the map. But I cannot, from the mere viewing of a map, be forced to believe that the territory is identical to the map, as I cannot be, from the expanse of a territory, forced to construct a map in a certain way. I may, for the sake of efficiency, leave off some of the finer details of the territory so that the map is readable. There's always this tension between use and accuracy. I think it was Box, not all models are wrong, but some models are useful, is I think something Dr. Box once said, and the same could be said, all maps are wrong, but some maps are useful, right? And in my opinion, the very fact that great literature is great when it shows irony, when it shows, like in Chekhov, how people who love one another are always misunderstanding one another, how it shows how good intentions end up in a failure to reach those intentions, and all this constitutes a great story. This in of itself would give us reason to think that ontology, human ontology, is not AA, but A. And in this way, in the same way that I do a mathematical proof to give us reason to think what the logical underpinnings or, a priori underpinnings of the universe might be, whether they're right or wrong, we tend to go to mathematics. It doesn't follow that, therefore, mathematics is necessarily discovered. They could be created. But the way that math works, and when it works, even in its nature of being created, seems to suggest something about the world. We just have to determine for ourselves what it suggests, how we apply it. So it goes with literature. You can't read War and Peace and know how to live your life, but you may from that gain principles or rules of thumb or notions that could help you live your life better. And from War and Peace, you can get a showing of things that maybe no other genre could show. Philosophy cannot show some of the interactions between the characters, or the reasons why characters who follow a certain moral philosophy end up in conflict with people who follow a different moral philosophy. That can't necessarily be brought out in philosophy, and it certainly can't be brought out in, straight philosophy in a manner that is emotionally impactful in the same way it can come out in literature. And we need to know, in order to really know what a situation is like, we need to feel the emotions of that situation. They talk about how in investing, it's one thing to know that you should invest in a stock and hold it, and entirely something else to do it. Because when you do it, you see yourself losing the money, you get cold feet, and you back out. And so the territory of investing in the stock market is full body. It deals with emotions, not just ideas. The map is what you read on a website about it, a successful investing strategy. But when you actually get in the business of investing, you see it's entirely different. It's much harder. Likewise, literature can help you approach the difficulty of holding to one's philosophical values better than, say, just philosophy, because philosophy doesn't give you a sense of the emotions you will feel when people come against your idea of justice or freedom or what have you. Wittgenstein, in point 314 of Zettel, said, we wrongly expect an explanation, whereas the solution is a description. I think this is quite nice because explanations are low resolutions of life. They're linguistical, they're language, they're an explanation, whereas life is something phenomenological, something phenomenal, something experienced. It's more like a description. And so likewise, when it comes to what life is going to be like, it's going to be more like a description than an explanation, that we're so trained by our techno-rationalist brains to look for an explanation that we don't look for a description. So we don't look to literature, which provides descriptions, for a notion of what the truth is, and instead we look to, say, mathematics or science. This being the case, in order to find a proof of ontology, we need to look for a description. We need to look to the arts. And in this way, literature is a proof in the same way that mathematics can be a kind of proof of physics. Literature can be a proof of philosophy. Literature can be a proof of ontology. Marcel and I will talk about how, there's this kind of test of common life, the test of the concrete. A philosophy is tested in its practice, and it's living it out. It's not tested in its internal consistency. It's tested in its manifestation, in its ability to correspond with a full lived experience. And so it's the test. So there's a way also where if a philosophy cannot be implotted, which is a play on the word embodied, then there would be reason to think that that philosophy is not accurate, that it has to be it has to be storied, it has to be installed, and it can't do that. There's a problem. Well, in the same way, if we can see and observe the nature of great literature, there would be reason to think that the vision of human beings that is instoried in the literature would in fact correspond with something of deepest ontological reality. And for me, that's AB. Now, someone may counter everything that says that good literature is a matter of taste, but I don't think that's the case at all. You can follow James Wood. He wrote a book called How Fiction Works, and it makes very clear that, say, fiction that focuses on particular time and space is better than fiction that has a general humanity, because we don't connect to a general humanity. We connect with particular people. We learn more about humanity by learning about the Karamazov brothers than by reading a book about humanity. It's a particular people in a particular place that has general significance to us, not general significance. That being the case, that right there suggests that truth is found in the particular, not in the universal, and therefore philosophy must be manifest in the particular, in the concrete, if there is going to be reason to think that it corresponds with something greater than that particularity. Because if you think about it, ultimately the universal is always participated in by and according to the particular. Great stories also are not going to have characters that are always sure of everything they do, because in life we don't experience our beliefs as things we're certain of unless we're closed-minded and closed off to difference, which is fundamentalism and problematic. Certainty is impossible in this life, only confidence. But where there's confidence, there's a possibility of mistake. But no one thinks they're going to make a mistake. Otherwise they wouldn't think the way they did. And so logic has to present itself to you in a manner that convinces you it's true when it cannot provide a transcendental grounding. How does that work? How does logic encounter the mind in a manner that it believes this? Which, of course, is where you get misunderstanding and characters misunderstanding one another, which is shown in literature all the time. Well, the fact that this is shown in literature all the time would force you to say, the nature of reality must be such where this is possible and where this can occur. And you could say, well, it's just because they're stupid. They're just dumb. That's why they misunderstand one another. No. When you follow great literature, they're completely accurately interpreting or reasonably interpreting the situations that they are encountering. There's no reason to think that they're dumb. They might be wrong, but they're reasonable. Well, how is it possible to be reasonable and wrong? How is it possible to have the seagull or the Sophocles? How is it possible to end up in tragedies where you have to make trade-offs of competing goods? Well, the nature of reality must be one where all values don't ultimately coalesce. They have to be traded off between. There is a contradiction that has to be worked out and understood through the movement of becoming. Well, that would mean that ontology has to be AB, not AA. James Wood, you can read How Fiction Works. You can read Harold Bloom on irony. I think it is the case that great literature is ironic. Well, there should not be irony if ontology is A, if logic is A. Irony is a result of reason. Irony is not a mistake of reason. Irony is a result of doing what is rational given to the information at the time, only to find that what you did actually leads you into the opposite of your result, precisely because you did what you did. Irony unveils the ultimate limitations of rationality and the problems of autonomous rationality without reference to truth. Literature is full of this, all throughout it. One of the points of the paper will be to say that AB exists precisely because of the divide of thought and perception, which is the divide between idea and phenomenon. And phenomenon can only be known in ideas, and ideas are, reflect the image and likeness of phenomenon. Well, this is a strange betweenness that we operate according to. So there's the AA of an idea, there's the AI of a thing, but we're never in just thing or just idea. And so we always have a kind of AB that we're existing with and dealing with. In that between space, the moment I try to understand the phenomenon of water according to the concept of water, there's an irony, because the concept of water is not the thing. And yet the irony is that I need the idea to understand the thing, but that idea is what keeps me from the fullness of the thing. The idea never equals the thing. So there's an irony there. I seek to know a thing, and that's why I use the idea, and that idea is precisely what keeps me from knowing the thing fully. Now, notice I said fully, not completely, in a Kantian sense. Just because I can't know a thing in of itself, like Kant says, doesn't mean I can't know it at all, or that what I know of it has nothing to do with how it is in of itself. And so, that's a mistake that's been made. But the idea is that thinking is ironic. It has to be ironic. And literature is what gives you reason to believe that thinking is ironic, because thinking wants to believe it's not ironic, because thinking wants to believe it's autonomous. It naturally seeks to convince you as a thinker of its own possibility of being autonomous, and it's easy to fall into that self-deception. In this way, the proofs of literature can help us avoid self-deception, and it can help us avoid error. One of the ways I try to deal with the debate between is math created or discovered is by saying that math is practically discovered, meaning it is so reliable that it might as well be discovered versus created. Now, it's a play on words, but there's something about fiction that seems practically discovered as well, where it might as well be about real people in real places. When you encounter great characters, they're believable. It's believable, right? They're relatable. It's like, oh, these people, this situation is possible in this world, right? Well, if it's possible in this world, then that would mean that there is an ontological background of which makes it possible. And if you see in relatable characters tragedy, irony, paradox, well, then you yourself can end up in tragedy, paradox, and irony. And therefore, you too would be participating in the ontological horizon in which such can be the case. The other thing to note is that, if we take this play on the word, fiction is the mathematics of humanities, I think you see fiction is the mathematics of a more human reality versus a reductionist reality. Literature includes subjectivity as opposed to bracketed out, as do sciences focused on approaching objectivity. Now, that doesn't mean science is bad. It just means that it has a function within reductionism, where literature is a kind of... The moment you're not reductionist, you almost have to show, right? Because you can't explain every dimension of a phenomenon. You can only show it, and however incompletely, but you have to show. The moment you explain, you're treating the phenomenon as information, as words, as data, which would be reductionist. So the moment you're trying to approach the emergent or fullness, you're dealing with you're dealing with showing. And so, another way to look at literature is the kind of proof possible that isn't reductionist. Literature is trying to show all dimensions of a thing without reducing them. And of, say, humans, possibility of, say, non-reductionist philosophy. Like, the moment you're trying to have a philosophy that is not reductionist, and you're trying to write it down, per se, then it has to be literature, because it has to be shown. It can't be told. The moment you're telling, there's reductionism. Telling is always reductionist. Words are always reductionist. The word cat is not the thing. So if you're trying to have a non-reductionist philosophy, a philosophy that is written down and not reductionist must be literature. It must be an art form. It must be something artistic. Well, that means it has to be interpreted. That means it could be misunderstood, and that means it's not going to be simple. And there kind of has to be interpretation, because you have to interpret what is not reduced into terms that you understand, which makes it reduced. Interpretation is a reductionist act, and a necessary reductionist act, so you can have comprehension. So whereas philosophy that's not literature does the interpretation for you. Now, of course, you still have to interpret that interpretation, yes, but there's a sense in which philosophy that is not literature is telling you what to think, and then you decide if you should or you should not think that way, where non-reductionist philosophy is showing you the case, and then you interpret that case. So you see how the interpretation becomes unavoidable, right? Because the moment you have the moment something is shown, you have to translate it into terms you understand, and that means you have to reduce it. Understanding is always a reduction. It's a necessary reduction, but it's a translation of a whole into parts so you can comprehend the parts. You can't eat a whole cake at once. You have to cut up the pieces to eat it, per se. So likewise, thinking has to reduce to digest so that the mind can digest. So philosophy that's not reductionist has to be literary, which then, funny enough, makes it seem like it's not philosophy, precisely because it's shown. It doesn't tell you what to think, and we get so trained to think of philosophy as something that tells us that when we encounter philosophy in the form of great literature, we don't even think it's philosophy. And this is how we can start to think that literature and philosophy have nothing to do with one another, which I think is a problematic mistake. Literature tries to describe the problem, per se, or just the human condition, not explain it. Though I have tried here to explain why literature can only describe the problem, and to posture that when literature is great and works, it describes and shows the reality that we would expect to arise more so out of an A is B versus an A is A. Now, I have to argue why A is B is the case versus A is A, and also one would have to read great literature to see that what I'm claiming is the case, and they would also have to agree to the premises of what constitute great literature, of which nothing will force that assent, right? Nothing is going to force you to believe that, of which in of itself would suggest A is not the case, because you have to interpret and decide, and there could be difference, and you have a rationality by which to believe in that difference, thus showing that the true isn't the rational, and therefore you cannot establish A is A. But there is a way in which the claims here are indeed literary, and literary cannot force assent. One has to choose to enter into them. But hopefully this paper provides reason for people to enter into this mode of thought, so that they might see if it aligns with their experience, and thus give them reason to think what the nature of the background and horizon of that experience might be. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Facebook, Instagram, and thank you so much for your time.